I'm Bernie, and welcome back to If This Is True. And today we're going to talk about one of my very favourite subjects, mining for rare earth. It isn't boring. We call it rare earth for a reason, because it's rare, like diamonds. I also love diamonds. I'm a chick. But it also means rare earth is very expensive, and as demand increases, which it is doing, so the price will continue to increase. And this green revolution we're all supposed to be backing is never going to be cheap. And our entire future has been bet, hasn't it, on these minerals, which are so hard to find and mine. It would cost more than the entire world owns combined to extract it. And those who point this out, of course, are shouted down, called climate deniers, for simply asking questions or pointing out hypocrisy, which is exactly what I'm going to do today. Because you should ask questions, and you should point out hypocrisy. Especially when your government is in the enthrall of NGOs, aren't you, Ed? And in the face of the propaganda from the MSM, who are funded to keep us terrified. So are we really saving the planet? Really? And I ask that in all seriousness, because from where I'm sat, it doesn't much look like we care about the planet at all. Green energy is supposed to be the solution for a cleaner, more sustainable future. But the process to get there isn't clean, it isn't safe, and it isn't equitable. What it is a fake, forced industrial revolution. One created by people you haven't voted for, to force through a new strand to our economy in the hope that one day it'll be worth it. It won't be worth it, and it won't be clean. The rarest minerals on our planet are hidden away underground, and they're often very hard to extract. So what are they really, apart from being the things on the periodic table you had to learn off by heart at school? I'm such a geek, I literally can probably still do it. Some are more useful, of course, than others. And minerals like lithium, copper, cobalt, neodymium, particular favourite. These elements are the backbone of all current technologies and essential in new renewable technologies. So you want an electric car, you need lithium and cobalt for the battery. You want clean wind energy, well, the turbines that generate that power rely on neodymium. Solar panels? Some of the most efficient solar panels use germanium to convert sunlight into electricity. And most people have no idea just how much of this stuff we need. So lithium, for example, goes into electric vehicles. And for one battery, you're looking at 5 to 20 kilograms of lithium. That's 44 pounds of rare metal extracted from the earth for each car. Now multiply that by the predicted 300 million electric vehicles worldwide by 2030, and you're talking about an environmental footprint that's so environmentally unfriendly, it almost makes my eyes bleed. And we haven't even touched on the cobalt, the nickel, and the graphite that are also essential in making these batteries. The clean revolution comes at a very dirty cost, including in the lives in developing countries. Where large corporations are often given subsidies funded by taxpayers, they invade towns and villages, displacing local people, destroying local environments, including agriculture, small businesses, and their watercourses. And as plenty of video evidence has attested to, often local people band together, desperate to replace their incomes, and they begin to mine for themselves. It's a gold rush. But they're mining in illegal mines. They work in dangerous conditions. Accidents and violence are common. Children are used as sources of income, toiling in dirty, toxic pits for hours upon hours, for days on end, to make a few pennies. These illegal operations are rarely closed down. After all, the more money the locals make for themselves, the less the government has to take responsibility for them. They, of course, obviously pay lip service to the UN. And when large deadly accidents happen, they try and fix things, but they quickly lose interest. And of course, those operations then continue. And that's a massive problem. Mining and extracting these metals isn't clean, either ethically or environmentally. It's as dirty and unfriendly as you could get. And after the people cost, there's an environmental cost. Let's go back to that 1 ton of lithium just for one car battery. Well, it requires about 500,000 gallons of water. That's a staggering amount. It leaves vast populated areas with water shortages, exactly as is happening in places like Chile at the moment. And cobalt? Well, more than 60% of our cobalt currently comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where that child labor I was talking about and exploitation of those local people run rampant. This isn't the green future of equality they promised, is it? It's dirty, destructive, and leaves environmental and human devastation in its wake, whilst also making some people very rich. Let's talk about how we get that stuff out of the ground on a larger scale. Well, that's not very green either, although they really don't want to talk about this. Large-scale mining requires diesel-powered trucks, excavators, drills, none of which can currently be powered by electricity and won't be in the near future. I know they say it can, but practically it can't, because mining equipment like, the Caterpillar 797, particular favourite, consumes hundreds of gallons of diesel every day. Mining that 1 ton of lithium requires not only the moving of the 500,000 gallons of water, but also several tons of ore, which of course needs substantial amount of power. There's a push to make mining equipment electric, but the reality is that the machines would require massive batteries. They're not feasible for mining operations. They just look good on the order books. Electric mining trucks would need to stop frequently for recharging, which would dramatically reduce their efficiency. Current battery technology can't power such heavy-duty materials for prolonged periods, and a loss in that efficiency, and of course the enormous cost of the electric vehicles compared to the ordinary fuel vehicle, would impact profits, and no one's going to sign that off. Now, what you also might not know is that when you got that stuff out of the ground, it involves massive quantities of the crushing of rock using toxic chemicals like sulfuric acid and nitric acid just to extract the material. It's a multi-stage process that requires a huge amount of energy again and raw materials from, what's that word? Oh yeah, oil. And once those raw materials are extracted, they need to go through smelting using, oil, which releases further emissions. Rare earth ores, like those containing neodymium, go through an extremely energy-intensive refining process using oil and coal to extract the metal. The extraction process also releases vast amounts of toxic sludge, which contaminates water and soil. This lake here was once an actual lake. Now it's just miles and miles of toxic sludge, destroying all the life around it. Now, these rare earth elements are in really high demand, and mining companies stand to make billions as global markets shift to renewable energy. But the profitability, of course, depends on the access to these materials in the first place. Let's think about war. Well, geopolitical stability doesn't always help the prices of cheap rare earth. Instability and confusion is much better for profit. Countries like China currently dominate the market, controlling most of the global production of rare earth, and they're using that dominance as a leverage in global trade. But China holds the monopoly not only on the mining, but also the refining. 80% of the whole world's rare earth elements pass through Chinese processing plants. It's no wonder, really, that China have nearly 1,200 power stations and another 300 under construction. And whilst you're on the subject of refining, I thought you might find it interesting that China is also the largest importer of coal. And also something funny, virtue-seeking Canada exports coal to China and then imports back solar panels and charges its own citizens a carbon tax to do it. Come on, it is funny. The West's dominance on China is a significant national security issue. especially as you've seen currently with tensions between the US and the EU and China following its friendship and allegiance to Russia. And stay with me here, because it's all a big tangled web that our leaders weave. Because Russia also holds significant reserves of rare earth elements, and the ongoing conflict between Russia and the West complicates global supply chains. Perhaps you should consider, why are we really bothering with a war? Do we care about Ukraine, or are we pretty keen on Russia's very, very precious landmass? And that's another good question we're not really supposed to talk about. But as the West sanctions Russia, the availability of key materials like nickel and palladium is, of course, threatened. And this raises concerns about those supply chains. Concerns are really good for higher prices and higher profits. Russia has some of the largest reserves of rare earth metals. And yes, sanctions have curtailed its exports, but only to the West, which is a bit of a bummer, really, for the West dependent on those materials for its net zero push. Russia doesn't care, though, because instead it just provides it directly to China, who makes stuff and ships it back to the West. So if this is true, then the entire foundation of the Green Revolution is just built on a profit lie. Mining is dirty and dangerous, geopolitically complex, with massive environmental and human costs. What's the real reason for this rush to meet net zero targets? Why are we throwing ourselves out of a plane before we've invented the parachute? If we're seriously going to transition to renewable energy, then you have to ask, why at this pace? If this is just an economic reset, then what do we as regular taxpayers stand to gain? Because unlike the invention of the train, it really isn't obvious what the benefit is. And it's taking an enormous amount of spin and propaganda by your government to nudge you into thinking it's a really great idea, which it really isn't. Globally, especially in the West, citizens are being ignored and vilified for pointing out the huge damage to the earth by mining at this level. And this isn't even including copper, which I'll cover in a separate video. I did say I loved mining. And to put this into context for you, we need to increase mining by 2,000% in the next 7 years to dig out enough minerals and raw materials to claim a fictitious net zero, where the emissions and the damage caused by the mining and the processing in the first place will utterly cancel out any gain from having renewable energy. It's a fool's game. And personally, I believe it's a con. If we're increasing mining, processing, and refining by 2,000%, then the emissions and the damage and the use of fossil fuels in those processes will also increase by 2,000%. That's just nuts. We won't lower anything at all. That's what I think. Anyway, I hope you didn't find that too boring, and I hope I was able to explain in more detail what I can only do a little bit on X and in articles. But I would like to hear your feedback, so please comment below and like and subscribe. And if there's anything specific you'd like to chat about here, then let me know. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again on If This Is True.